Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell and I'm your host. Today our guest is Tom Lymbery. Tom is from Grey Creek Store, Grey Creek, BC, right on beautiful Kootenay Lake. Tom is the author of two historical books that have great significance for our region. Tom's Grey Creek Volume 1, Tom's Grey Creek Volume 2. Tom, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here today. You've got two volumes out. The new volume just came out. What's the difference between the two?
Okay, the first volume goes from 1911, when my dad came from England to grow fruit, and to 1945, and then the second volume goes from 1946 to 1980.
So Tom, you were born in Grey Creek, what year?
1928.
So that makes you what, 88 years old?
88, yeah.
So you've seen a lot of history come and go in the Kootenay Lake area.
Because we were on the only road across Canada for many, many years. The big sternwheeler, the Nisukin, was built by the Canadian Pacific Railway to run from Kootenay Landing to Nelson daily.
Right.
And when the CPR completed the rail track on the west side of Kootenay Lake, that sternwheeler was not needed anymore.
I see. Now I understand that sternwheeler actually came in right into Grey Creek. Is that correct?
Oh yes, right at that.
So do you remember it arriving?
Oh yeah, my sister and I used to have to run the phone messages every day to the sternwheeler captain, and also to the Greyhound drivers. There would be a daily Greyhound that also brought us their mail. That Greyhound was on its way from Nelson to Calgary.
So Tom, this wasn't just any ordinary boat. Can you just describe the sternwheeler a little bit for me?
Now, I think, hope many people have been to Caslo to see the Moye.
Yes.
Now, the Nisukin was almost 3 times as big.
Okay.
Big enough, 30 feet across the bow, big enough to park a smaller Greyhound. These were just 35 passenger Greyhounds.
So you're talking about a bus on the deck?
Yes.
Wow,
of the 16 years that they took the daily bus across the ferry, they never had any sort of accident. And that sternwheeler it was a bit rough going around Cape Horn because our Grey Creek is in a big bay that's about 7 miles long. We're a mile inside the bay, and the boat going across would have to go from Grey Creek to Balfour, out around the point where the waves sometimes cross.
Right. So Tom, you're the proprietor. I know your family now is basically running your store for you. You've stepped back just a little bit. Grey Creek Store is sort of one of those iconic stops in the Kootenays. Tell me what makes your store so unique.
Well, we stocked everything we needed. It was too far. It was quite a ways from businesses where we needed supplies. So my dad always tried to sell unusual things. And because we had people waiting for the ferry, we had built-in customers for years too. So my dad stocked unusual things like Roman coins, which a lot of people thought were replicas.
Okay. So I can only attest to the fact that when you walk in your store, there's something unique around every corner. So it's from coins to chainsaws. There's a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about your book. 200 stories or accounts in each book. A tremendous amount of illustrations and photos. Tom, tell us about the process of putting together these two volumes.
Okay, the writing the book is no problem because I've been writing stories for 25 years for our local newspaper. So I just have to recollect some of those and put them together. But the pictures, we're very fortunate to have a professional book designer in Boswell, just south of Grey Creek, Warren Clark, and he's designed a lot of books, and he does the setup. A lot of this is his design, and then he can also improve these black and white pictures.
I see.
That can be improved enormously. You see many books where the pictures are not very clear, but they can be done.
Yeah, you're talking about the production value on your books, Tom. I have to say they're very well done, professionally put together, easy to read, and as you mentioned, the illustrations really stand out. They tell a story in themselves.
Yeah, well,
do you have an idea how many photos you have in each book?
Well, this
I would say hundreds. Is that correct?
This one has. I did count them in the book one, and it has 205 previously unpublished photos.
Okay, so a real treasure trove of local history.
And our Francis Roback who lives in Grey Creek, worked 30 years at the Glenville Museum in Calgary.
Okay.
And she's the one who's done the editing and written most of the captions and the sidebars.
Right. So Tom, just talk a little bit about Grey Creek and the area. Even give people a little bit of a geography lesson. What area are we talking about exactly?
Well, Kootenay Lake is the largest ice-free lake in Canada, and it was also the feature. It was the only Western Canadian lake in the program called Great Canadian Lakes. I don't know whether sometimes that turns up on TV.
Okay.
I'm in that program for about 30 seconds.
I see. Okay.
Telling about the lost gold boulder.
Okay. So as you leave Creston, you drive up along Kootenay Lake. You can see the lake to your left, of course, Grey Creek, and then you come to Crawford Bay.
Crawford Bay, Kootenay Springs Golf Course is known to many people. It's very, and of course this second book tells you a lot about the construction of that course, because it was unusual to have a multi-million-dollar course built in a rather isolated area at that time. It's been very successful.
Right. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful course, and sort of one of the signature golf courses in the region. And your area is blessed to have such a great course.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about your second book. So when did that come out, Tom?
Second book we published last fall in 2016. Came out in October, and this is 100 pages, more than 100 pages more than book one. It took us 3 years to get it finished, and Frances Roback, who did the editing, and we do have her name on the cover. I couldn't get her name on the first one, but I did manage to make sure she's acknowledged on the second one.
Good. Now, Tom, you've seen changes. You mentioned the fact that it was sort of an isolated location for many years. It seems like it's pretty busy these days with visiting tourists. Is that correct? It
wasn't quite so isolated, really, because the only road across Canada went through, and the ferry had to come to the ferry, and that started from 1931 to 1947.
What changed then?
Then they extended the road to Kootenay Bay, which they had originally intended to do, and put on new ferry in service, and then Asukin became surplus and was bought by the city of Nelson for the Sea Cadet Corps, and then it got loose and sank. So then after that it was sold to a scrap dealer who I interviewed extensively. There's quite a few of his pictures in the book as well.
Right. So I can just imagine those big stern wheelers, going across the lake. It must have been a majestic sight.
Well, when that boat was built, it was the largest stern wheeler in Canada, in even San Francisco or the Yukon. 4 decks. It was designed with 100 cabins because it was designed to go daily from Kootenay Landing. The rail line came to Kootenay Landing on Kootenay Lake in 1898, and there was no connection between that and Proctor. So the sternwheeler took the passengers and express to Nelson, came back the next day with the eastbound.
I see, yeah. So in I think it was 63, things changed a little bit. What happened then?
62, the Rogers Pass opened.
Okay.
And it was like somebody put a gate across our highway.
Okay.
Because the Greyhound service we had at that time, Greyhound was the rails were not attracting passengers anymore. People were traveling Greyhound. That not everybody had a car like they did today. We had 4 eastbound, 4 westbound Greyhound, and they would be often triple header with 3 buses.
I see. So what you're talking about is the establishment of the Trans-Canada Highway through Rogers Pass. And then south of you also there was something that impacted Grey Creek. What was that?
Yeah, well, the Creston-Selma Road was completed, and at that point we lost our Greyhound.
What year was that?
And that was October of 1963.
Okay. So lots of changes then that brought to the community and so forth. How do you think the communities have coped over the years? Have you seen creative ways to adapt to that sort of loss in traffic?
Yeah, well, tourism is still a very important business, and golf and that sort of area. A very interesting operation on Kootenay Lake is Yasodhara Ashram. That's a much bigger operation than you realize. They are currently rebuilding the Temple of Light, which is visible from the ferry. We had a tour of this on Saturday, and it's quite something. And that's
Okay, Tom, let's also just talk about your family. So it was originally started by your father, is that correct?
Yeah.
And when did he come to Kootenay Lake?
He came to Kootenay Lake in 1911,
Okay.
and at that time a lot of Europeans were being drawn to Canada with the promise that with 5 to 10 acres would allow you to plant your fruit trees and enjoy fishing and hunting while they were growing, and then you could spend a bit of time and even Cranbrook Kootenay orchards, they were selling these 10-acre lots in Vermeer all over.
So it was quite popular in the Kootenays.
Yeah, and of course,
a little bit of a promotional scheme in Britain, right?
But on the other hand, the cherries did very well. The cherries were a cash crop that carried us through the 40s, the 30s, and the Depression years.
So we're going to wrap this up in a few minutes here, Tom, but I know that you have a passion for Grey Creek Pass. Can you just talk a little bit about Grey Creek Pass?
When the Cominco and the West Kootenay Power, when they reopened the Bluebell mine at Riandel in 1951, and that part of this was because the price of lead went up because of the Korean War. And so they needed power, so they built the longest power span in the world across Kootenay Lake, 2 miles of power span. Nobody had ever tried that before.
And that still exists today, right?
And it's still in use, yes. And then they built a power line to supply Kimberley. Kimberley didn't have enough power, and Kimberley was going into the fertilizer business as well, along with the mine. So that road was a strictly 4-wheel drive. It was a toughie to build, but you could get through it with a Volkswagen or 4-wheel drive, but not anything else. And then Kootenay Springs, of course, and everybody else, because a lot of the people that worked at Riandel were transferred from Kimberley. They had relatives there, so we had different organizations. Rose or Gray, There's Gotta Be a Way was one of them. And so finally they did build the road in 1990. They built a 6,800-foot summit, but it's passable by any type of vehicle as long as there's no snow. It's open from usually the 1st of July to the end of October.
Right. So I know it's a popular road for a lot of outdoor people and so forth. So who knows, maybe they'll upgrade it even more in the future.
It's part of the Trans-Canada Trail, which is going to be officially this year. It opens, and we have a trail crew that's extending some of this so people don't have to cycle along the highway, for instance.
So Grey Creek Store had a significant milestone anniversary recently. I think you were celebrating 100 years,
yes,
is that correct?
This year it's 104 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not too many businesses can say that they've had that kind of legacy in the Kootenays. So just tell me who's operating the store. How's it been going lately?
Well, my son has his own business in Spokane, but he comes up every couple of weeks, and he's the chief.
Okay.
And he's very good at finding good employees.
Right.
But we have a very good local manager. She's worked for us for nearly 25 years. And it's interesting the changes that made. We sold insurance, including ICBC, for 40 years. Finally sold that part of the business. It got too much to handle everything else.
If I recall, I came into your store one day and you were signing a marriage license for someone. That was part of your service as well.
Well, I'm still a notary. I'm a appointed notary public, which means I'm authorized to certify signatures, and that's what I was doing at that time.
Right. So Tom, thank you again for being a guest here on Talking Kootenay Books. Your 2 books, 2 volumes, give us a great insight into the history of our region, Kootenay Lake in particular. Is there a volume 3 is the question?
No, I don't, not in this type of series. I may come out with a smaller book about a specific, for instance, riding the Kettle Valley Railway or something like that.
Good for you. Tremendous read and a tremendous amount of research. Congratulations, Tom.
And they're going to continue to be available. History books need to be in print. This is our second printing. And we may go to a second printing of this one at some point. But
so I've asked the other authors what the reaction has been to their book. What about your 2 books, Tom? What do people like about your books?
Well, I can't believe people keep coming. Even Saturday we were at a concert at the Ashram, and somebody buttonholed me and wanted to know more about the Little Grey Home in the West, which was a very popular song that was written many years ago, and it was written by somebody who lived in Grey Creek. So,
right. Well, thank you, Tom. We appreciate you being our guest. The books, Volume 1, Volume 2, Tom's Grey Creek, the history of Grey Creek and a lot of the West Kootenay's Kootenay Lake memoirs and history. So a job well done, an enjoyable read. It would be an asset, or it was certainly an advantage to everyone to have one of these books in their library, because it talks so much about the local history. Congratulations, Tom. And this has been Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. Today my guest is Red Sorensen. Red is from the Creston area. Welcome, Red. It's great to have you here. Red has published the autobiography called The Man Called Red. So I think that'll become evident as we talk about the book. So Red, tell me, what inspired you to write your book, The Man Called Red?
Well, I knew nothing about my parents, and I knew absolutely nothing about my grandparents. And I have a family of 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls. And my wife had a family of 15 children. And I thought it was imperative that they all learned about their grandparent, their father and their dad. And that was the motivative of writing the book.
Okay, so good for you, Red. You know, a lot of people have an interesting life, but they fail to write it down. So hats off to you for doing that. I was wondering, as I looked through the book, is it possible that you were a forest ranger, you crashed a plane, you were a cowboy, all these things? Were you making it up, or is this for real?
It's for real. There's not a word in this book that isn't true.
Okay. So tell me about some of your experiences. What were you involved in?
Well, when I was small, I was born and raised in Calgary, till I was 6 years old, and then we moved from there. And I always wanted to be a cowboy. And I used to ride around with the milkman in his wagon and learn about horses and whatnot. And then we moved to southern Alberta, and I worked on farms and whatnot, and worked during the war alongside German prisoners of war. And I worked enough to get myself $20 so I could buy a horse.
Okay.
And I've always had a horse all my life.
Right. So you also became a big guide hunter. Is that correct? So that was a little bit of a leap from the days when you just had a horse. How did that all transpire?
I homesteaded. I was a forest ranger. Actually, I went to the Chilcotin and the Caribou and learned how to be a cowboy. And I was a city kid, and it was tough learning, but I learned it as much as I could. I rodeoed, I farmed, ranched, and whatnot like that. And I was in a little town called Lexus Creek in the Caribou. And I happened to be chasing the forest ranger's daughter. And he said, there's no future in being a cowboy. He says, why don't you take a course and learn how to be a forest ranger? So I said, okay, well, why not? And so then I took this test in Williams Lake, and I passed it with high honors. And then when I come along to put me someplace, they informed me that all the jobs had been filled for that year, BC Forest Service. And so I just went back to being a cowboy, and then about a month later, he got a hold of me and he said, you've got to go to Fort St. John. You're going to be a forest ranger up there. So that's where I went. I went to Fort St. John and met my wife, which is a story in itself.
So let's just talk about your writing process. How did you remember all those details? How did you get them down on paper? Did you keep a diary, a journal?
No, I never. I wish I had it, or I wish my wife had it, but neither one of them did. And when I finally, I had a serious accident, and I decided that I had to print my book. I had to get it out. And so then I started looking at pictures, and during my occupation as a big game guide, I had written every year sort of a summary that I handed it to the hunters that I wanted to try to book. And putting that all together, I was able to bring back a lot of memories, and that's...
So the book is called A Man Named Red, so I see a little bit of silver now, so I'm assuming that there was some red hair there.
Yeah, there was a lot of red hair.
Okay. So was that sort of the standard nickname that people would identify you with?
The old man I went to work for when I first became a cowboy, the first thing he said to me, he said, "What's your name?" I said, "Norman." He said, "No, not, it's Red."
Yeah.
And that's how I got my name Red, and it stuck with me all these years.
Good. Why do you think it's important that people write down their memoirs or put this information down on paper so others can read it?
Everybody has a story to tell. I don't care what it is, they have a story to tell. And I think they should at least take some time, if not in a diary or in a book, at least put it down on paper so their families later on in life can know about them.
How long did it take you to write your book?
After I got hurt and decided that I better get at it, 2 years I spent.
What about the publishing process? What was that like to go through?
That was an experience. In Creston, I talked to some people about publishing, and they said, "Well, get a hold of this certain lady. She's put out quite a few books, and she can probably guide you along the way." So I talked to her, and she seemed to be interested in it, and she said for $2,000 she would edit it and format it. And she had some ties with some publishers down in Victoria and Vancouver, and she thought the book should be printed. Well, this was fine, and after she made a rough drawings and whatnot of what she thought should be in the book, it looked like the book was going to be her book and not my book. And my book was going to be my book, and it was going to be done my way or not at all. And so we fell by the wayside there.
Are you pleased with the way it turned out now?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it tells your story the way you wanted it told?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Red, just talk about the fact that, you know, people have got memoirs, they've got ideas and so forth. What would you suggest that they do to record those memories?
Put it down on paper or on the computer, whatever way they were. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how are you promoting your book?
I have it on Amazon, and I have it with a publisher down in the United States. And I travel around and promote it that way at bookstores and museums and whatnot. I have probably 50 outlets in Vancouver, or in British Columbia and in Alberta.
Right. Yeah. So, in fact, I met you at the Kimberley Farmers Market, so obviously you're taking a proactive approach and promoting it there.
Absolutely.
So that's great. When it comes to self-publishing, it's always a challenge because you want to make sure that, you know, people get your book, but also that it's a quality product. Are you happy with the way everything turned out?
Yes, I had a personal friend that is a executive director of one of the largest hunting organizations in the world in the United States. And after I got finished trying to do something with publishers, I sent him a copy of the manuscript, and he took their executive, not executive, but their head editorial writer for their magazine, and had him go through it. He went through it, told me what I should be doing with it, never changed any word, told me what I should be doing with it, and I followed his advice.
Good. Always good to have those suggestions, those mentors that you can follow. Red, thanks for taking the time being a guest today. I know that it's a lot of work to get a book out, and I certainly congratulate you on putting out The Man Called Red. It's really captivates your life and the exciting things that went on throughout that lifetime. So thank you again for taking the time.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm Keith Powell, and this is Talking Kootenay Books.